He was rich and had invented the eviction blitz, where ironclad software filed lawsuits on the 8th day of delinquency and stacked late fee steps. And he could no longer hide behind cold words like efficiency and scale, because he understood housing is not a line in an asset column, but safety and relationships, and an admitted guilt is worth anything only when it turns into action with dates, amounts, and addressees. Caleb Morgan, 41, an entrepreneur and a dollar millionaire who had packed human housing into predictable metrics, was going to step up to the press on the steps of the Fulton County Courthouse on one clear autumn day and announce a voluntary moratorium, a full cancellation and refund of junk charges for the past 12 months, a repair escrow with public reporting, the sale of part of the portfolio to resident cooperatives, a seat for a tenant's representative on the board, and the forfeiture and return of his own bonuses. He was doing it because he saw not only cameras in front of him, but two simple human stakes: his sister Hannah, who no longer trusted him, and his daughter Maya, who was ashamed to carry his last name at school. And he told himself, "If I do not name my guilt now and set deadlines and mechanisms, then I will remain the man who hid behind a press release." And it was right after this speech that someone in the crowd fired at him. He had grown up in Georgia, where red clay stuck to sneakers and to decisions, and where late autumn looked strict and clear. In 2009, their mother lost the house over mortgage delinquencies, and he swore then not to be weak. And 10 years later, he already ran a technology fund that bought single-family houses across the Sun Belt and rented them out as a standardized product with a unified policy on fees and repairs. He had approved an algorithmic strategy, an eviction blitz. On the 8th day of delinquency, the system automatically filed for eviction. Stepwise late fees were added in parallel, rent rose dynamically, and renters' data were sold to third-party brokers under the pretty label data monetization, and saving on repairs turned into operational profit, but in reality into injuries, rotten railings that broke under a teenager's hand, smoke detectors that did not work, cracked steps people fell from. Pressure was growing in Atlanta, and that pressure was not only about reputation, but about law. The Office of the Attorney General of Georgia was collecting a mass of complaints and preparing procedural steps. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was picking apart junk fees by category. The United States Department of Housing and Urban Development was requesting materials on fair housing and looking at failures to accommodate people with disabilities. The United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division was analyzing discriminatory patterns in filings and penalties. Legal Aid Atlanta and the Tenant Union of Atlanta were lining up at local courts and outside management offices. And when 15-year-old Maya, his daughter, texted, "Everyone at school knows what you do. I am ashamed," he felt all the heat of words like scalability and growth leave him, exposing cold numbers that did not save him, but laid him bare. He admitted what he had long repressed. The memory of his mother was not a trauma of the past, but a debt of the present, and he had been transferring that debt to other families, calling it a product. That day began simply, without any show. A clear sky, transparent light, thin traces of reddish clay on the asphalt, and in his wallet, his old card from the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority. He carried it as a quiet anchor to ordinary life, so as not to forget that the people writing those lines were the ones paying him rent. The morning was storyboarded, signatures on payment orders, checking the language, hand-delivering packets to the people to whom he had to say, "I am guilty and I will pay," and then stepping to the press at the Fulton County Courthouse. In the kitchen of his rented apartment, he repeated to himself, "Say the word guilt, say, I am staying, name the amounts, the timelines, the mechanisms, list addresses, explain oversight, and do not dodge simple questions. Do not promise what you cannot execute, and do not retreat into intentions." He was approaching this day not as an information hit, but as the payment of a bill that could not be deferred. He sat at the table with his laptop. Next to it lay a foam cup of coffee from Waffle House, the lid tacky with syrup. To the left, a ring of keys with a heavy Ford F-150 fob, and all of it kept him on the ground. The phone buzzed. The general counsel's name lit up on the screen. He pushed his wallet with the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority card aside, tapped "Accept," and listened as the calm voice urged him to delay the specifics. "We must soften the rhetoric. If you state amounts and timelines, it will be an admission of liability." The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development will use it. The United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division is already conducting inquiries, and your words will become evidence, the lawyer said, and he felt how smoothly these sentences lay down, yet slid past the truth. "I will name amounts and timelines, and I will sign today," he said, looking at the printout, and added, "We are publishing a control mechanism, not a slogan. Shareholders will sue, banks will review covenants. You are creating the risk of a chain reaction," the lawyer said, and the air grew thicker. He hit mute, leaned the phone against the foam cup, and looked at the line, "Repair Escrow." His inner speech was not a metaphor, but an invoice. Why had he covered himself so long with words like scalability and product, when behind them were children and stairwells? Was he not the same person whose house had once been taken? Would he be able to speak today in a way his sister and daughter would recognize as honest? He was afraid because specifics break comfortable corners, and ashamed because he had let those specifics be postponed for too long. He unmuted and told the lawyer, "Prepare the copies, the payment orders, the wiring instructions, the audit procedures, and the termination agreements for the sale of data. This is not a public relations day. This is a day of reckoning," and ended the call, because on this day he needed to speak briefly. He understood that fear was not a reason to retreat, but an indicator that he had finally stepped into an honest frame. He drove to Hannah's not for her blessing and not for a good scene, but because he believed it right to hand her copies of the orders and a handwritten letter for Maya. The road ran between trees, wind-herded yellow leaves along the shoulder. His sneakers left red clay marks on the floor mat, and that small detail, somehow, felt important. He stepped into the kitchen, tea scented the air, an Atlanta Braves magnet held a Publix receipt for milk, eggs, and white sandwich bread. A clip gripped a schedule of school meetings, and the wobbly folding IKEA chair squeaked just like last time. "Why did you come? Do you need a cover shot and the right tear on camera?" Hannah asked, steadying the kettle so it would not whistle too soon. "I brought documents. Today I will say this out loud and sign. If you consider it possible, please pass my letter to Maya," he said, setting the packet on the table where a stack of white bread lay. Inside it, the printed moratorium, the $10 million order to the city's legal aid fund, the description of the repair escrow with public reporting, and a list of addresses where work would begin in the first week. "You once called our house an asset and available liquidity," she said, "and I remember that word forever. Do you remember how Mom sat on the steps holding the keys when we moved out?" "I remember, and it is my fault," he said, and for the first time he said it without brackets or excuses. A short memory rose inside him. The narrow hallway, the smell of laundry powder, a calendar magnet with a penny tire shop ad, as if all of it were one layer of life. As a teenager, he had sworn to be strong, and he grew into the man who set an algorithm to file on day 8. He felt guilt and the fear that everything would be seen as maneuver and public relations repentance, and that thought burned more than a shareholder suit. "I will read it," Hannah said, laying the packet on the table, "but not for you, for Maya and for those you evicted. Let at least one rich man name exact terms and amounts and then actually pay." He nodded and, as he left, looked at the Atlanta Braves magnet and the Publix receipt as if these household objects were a ruler for measuring the truth. He understood that trust cannot be returned by words or even a single large sum. He could only pull it to his side with a sequence of payments, cancellations, repairs, and new procedures that are clear and verifiable. He stopped at a neighborhood council room because he considered it imperative to hear directly from the Tenant Union of Atlanta and Legal Aid Atlanta, not to beg them to postpone the protest, but to set out steps and leave documents. The room smelled of coffee and old paint. Flyers for the community college hung on the wall. Appliance repair in 6 weeks, bookkeeping for beginners, GED prep. On the table a clear container held rolls, and there was a stack of paper cups. "We have heard you intend to announce a moratorium. Sounds good. Only we also know what your letters about late fee steps and automatic filings on day 8 sound like. Will you name an amount and a timeline?" A man in a tenant union T-shirt said, his calm voice firmer than a shout. 24 months, a moratorium on evictions across the entire portfolio, full cancellation and refund of junk fees for the past 12 months, $10 million to the city's legal aid fund within 30 days, a repair escrow with open online reporting and the right for tenants to initiate requests directly, sale of not less than 20% of the portfolio to resident cooperatives at independent valuation without a control premium and with an installment plan the city can support, a seat for a tenant's representative on the board of directors, and the forfeiture and return of top team bonuses, he said, not looking away. And all of this in writing, not a press announcement but signed documents with wiring details, a schedule, audit procedures, and access for observers? A lawyer from Legal Aid Atlanta asked, raising a folder of their cases. "Here, and today it goes public, and we are adding observer access for your organization," he said, sliding the folder across. His inner voice ticked like a metronome. Enough words, guilt is an invoice, redress is a transaction, a notice, a completion certificate, a closed work order. He felt shame for the dry language of past letters and resolved for the present to speak in the language of payments. He understood that his courthouse speech could not be a performance. It had to be the reading of a contract with a clear system of control. He went to the county clinic where it smelled of bleach and the clean linoleum shone as if still damp, because he wanted to see the consequences of delayed repairs not as complaints and charts, but as a specific arm in a cast and a specific staircase that wobbled. He sat on the edge of a plastic chair holding a foam cup and waited for a woman to be free whom a cousin had driven in. "Are you the one they show on the news?" she asked, and he nodded. "I am the one who approved the algorithm and saved on your repair. It is my fault," he said, adding, "We will pay your medical expenses and replace the railing urgently to a concrete address and deadline." "I do not believe words. I believe it when the money arrives and the stairs do not wobble," she said, tucking a slipping rubber band back over her bandage. He handed her a copy of the order and a sheet with the first week addresses, gave her his number, and immediately added, "I know a number is not a payment confirmation." He walked out feeling his inner voice stop operating on stories and start operating on deals and timelines. He understood that any sentence he uttered that day needed to become a confirmed transaction and a closed work order, or else it was a ribbon of empty promises. He went back to the office and called in the product and operations teams. They had to physically disable the procedural block that filed on day 8 and the node that stacked late fees. He sat at a table where a pizza box had gone cold, its edges rubbery now, and said something simple. "Today you disable the module that files for eviction on the 8th day, and you turn off the stepwise late fee algorithm. You put it in read-only mode, you start logging all manual decisions, and you build a notification script for the management companies." The head of product looked up and said, "If we turn everything off at once, we miss money. It wrecks the model for the quarter." He answered, "A model in which injuries and shelters are a side effect is already wrecked, morally and legally. We are rebuilding it around human control." "That is a road with no rollback," the data engineer said. He nodded. "Exactly." He ordered a 2-week work list exported, addresses with rotten steps, broken railings, faulty smoke detectors, and directed contractors with a public tracker. Asked for a "Submit a Request" button in the tenant's online account with a display of the repair escrow balance, and announced observer access to the panel for the Tenant Union of Atlanta and Legal Aid Atlanta. Inside, he kept a simple tally. If he did not switch the algorithm off today, his words at the courthouse would be cheaper than an empty cup. He understood that the new system had to be resilient without him, because that was the honest test, whether the mechanism worked without a hand-operated savior. He opened his laptop and started a video call with investors, because he considered it honest to tell them up front. "I am taking concrete obligations. These are not intentions." 3 windows popped up. One partner held a paper cup, the second scrolled his phone, the third sat against an abstract painting. "Your appearance will hit valuation. You plan to give money and rights to tenants. This destroys the model," the first partner said, and the second added, "Selling part of the portfolio to resident cooperatives without a control premium contradicts your duty to investors." He answered, "My duty does not allow me to hide illegal charges and injuries behind formulas. We are already under scrutiny by the Office of the Attorney General of Georgia, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Our model is no longer a model, but a source of lawsuits and risk. I will not fight the city and its people. I will repair." "Then we are preparing a shareholder suit," the third said, without lifting his eyes from a document. He felt a cold clarity. He was ready to pay with his stake and his role for the right to tell the truth and act. He understood that saving face at the price of someone else's home was not an option. The price was too high and had already been paid by others. He walked to the window and looked down at the street where, under a tree, someone was eating noodles from a box, and suddenly wanted something simple and hot to shake off the strain. He stopped by Waffle House and picked up coffee and eggs to go. The cashier, a kid with a badge and tired eyes, recognized him. "You the guy from the news? My cousin rents one of your houses. Half her paycheck goes to penalties," he said, ringing him up. "Today I will announce the cancellation of all junk fees for 12 months and an automatic refund," he answered. "Those are words until they are money," the cashier said. He nodded. "Exactly. Watch the accounts." He stepped outside, and in the pocket of his heavy jacket, the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority card scratched faintly, reminding him that the lines on cardboard were not a symbol, but a route to return home. A sharp question flared inside. Had he become brave too late? He answered himself, too late, but lateness is no excuse to do nothing. He understood that being late does not remove the obligation. He stopped at one of the properties where the local manager complained about impossible conditions under pressure, and in the yard saw boxes of materials, wires on a hook, children's bicycles under a canopy. Nearby, sneakers drying, caked in red clay. He called the manager. As of today, no filings, including on the old schedule, and no stepwise late fees. You send letters to people and post notice on the board, he said. That chokes cash flow, the manager answered. It chokes a habitual wrong, not the flow. Adjust the budget and start repairs. Escrow opens today. Contractors are assigned, he said. And people will still, the manager began. People will pay and live. We will repair and answer. No need to embellish, he said, and ended the call, feeling his calm tone become managerial habit when what he needed that day was human bluntness. He understood that now each no inside the system was not cruelty, but protection against a return to convenient dishonesty. Just before heading to the courthouse, he opened his computer again to scan his inbox and saw a message from Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter Tasha Nguyen with a link. The headline was careful, not a scream. Yet the first paragraphs struck harder than loud words. Internal eviction blitz Q3 packet, late fee stepladders, contract for the sale of tenant data to brokers, signatures. He scrolled down, saw charts, weeks. On the x-axis, bars for filed on day 8, income from junk fees, and his own signature on the data monetization agreement. And it was no surprise. It was a mirror. His assistant called at once. "Are you still going out there?" she asked, and he heard not a public relations fear, but a human worry. "Yes, and I will name what she published. It is true, and it is my responsibility. The practice has ended, the contract has been terminated, and the letters are signed," he said. "People on those steps will be angry," she said. "People have the right to be angry," he replied. A quick check flashed inside. If there had been no publication, would he still have gone out? He told himself yes, because he understood this was not about appearance, but about the impossibility of living as he had. He understood that publicity was not a punishment, but a precise tool forcing timelines and sums to be real. At 12:58, a message arrived from the office of the Attorney General of Georgia. The tone was dry, businesslike, with a link to a draft temporary restraining order on new evictions and an invitation to a voluntary stipulation. He called the lawyer back, because it was the right thing to do. "It means you are not announcing a moratorium. You are being forced into one. Do not say the word guilt. Do not promise to forfeit bonuses, otherwise shareholders. Frame it as cooperation without admission. It is standard," the lawyer said. "I will say guilt, and I am staying, and I forfeit and return, and we agree voluntarily. This is not a language game. This is reality," he said. "You are creating a precedent," the lawyer said. "Good. Let there be a precedent. A rich man says, 'I am guilty,' and pays," he answered. And that was the end of the conversation, because the court of the public was about to begin, and he wanted to show up not empty-handed. He understood the next steps had to be fast and simple: signatures, orders, publication. The drive to the courthouse felt weightless. The sun a little to the left, the wind carrying dry leaves, people around him with signs. He saw foam cups marked with sugar, heard short, quick phrases, and in his jacket pocket, the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority card scuffed the lining. The public relations man walked beside him and whispered, "You have 3 minutes before the crowd starts shouting. Speak briefly about intentions. We will send details later." "Today the details are the point," he said without looking. He knew if he drove away from specificity again, it would not be the end of a reputation, but of his own attempt to remain human. The phone vibrated. He saw Maya. "Are you really doing this and not pretending?" his daughter asked, her voice less cold than a week before. "I am. I will name sums, deadlines, mechanisms. I will sign and publish confirmations. I am not asking you to take my word for it. Just watch what is done," he said. "We will watch from aunties. Please speak simply so everyone understands," she said. He hung up and inhaled as if air had become usable only now. He saw Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter Tasha Nguyen. She walked up, raised the microphone, and said evenly, "Will you mention the internal packet and the data sale agreement, or will you try to dodge?" He answered just as evenly, "I will, and I will say, it is my responsibility, and the practice has ended and been documented." A short quiet settled inside. It was not confidence. It was the calm that comes from having gathered yourself and told yourself the truth. He realized he was not asking for understanding. He was offering a contract, and that contract would be verified not by sympathy, but by statements and work orders. He stepped to the microphone, asked for quiet, and for a second thought about how Hannah's kettle whistles in the kitchen and how the folding IKEA chair wobbles, and somehow that gave his speech the right temperature. "My name is Caleb Morgan," he said, and continued without metaphors and without abbreviations. "I am the founder of a fund that bought many houses and rented them out in Georgia and across the Southeast. I invented an algorithm that automatically filed for eviction On the 8th day of delinquency, I approved stepwise late fees. I approved a contract for the sale of tenant data to brokers. This is my responsibility and my fault. I have come to say I am changing it, and that I am staying here to pay the debt and meet these obligations." He raised his eyes because he needed to look people in the face and began to list, as if reading a ledger. First, a moratorium on new evictions across the entire portfolio for 24 months, effective today after filing documents with the clerk. The management companies and tenants will receive notices. The text will be public. Second, a full cancellation and refund of junk fees for the past 12 months. Funds will be automatically credited to tenant accounts within 30 days with detailed statements. For those with closed leases, there will be a form for direct payment. Third, $10 million will be transferred to the city's legal aid fund within 30 days under audit. I will sign the payment order today and publish the bank confirmation. Fourth, a repair escrow, separate accounts tied to each address, with open online reporting and the right for tenants to initiate requests and see work status. The minimum balance for each house is not less than 3% of annual income, replenished monthly, audited quarterly, publicly accessible. Fifth, the sale of not less than 20% of the portfolio to resident cooperatives at independent valuation, without a control premium, with an installment plan the city can support. Independent appraisers will be invited. Observers from Legal Aid Atlanta and the Tenant Union of Atlanta will be present at all sessions. Sixth, a seat on the fund's board of directors for a representative of tenants, chosen by open vote, with veto power over eviction and repair items. Seventh, forfeiture and return of last year's bonuses for the top management, including mine, with those funds directed to the repair escrow and the legal aid fund. The waiver is already signed. Statements will be published. He added concrete household details so this would not be a general statement. The railing on Jonesboro Road will be replaced within a week. Smoke detectors are purchased and en route to warehouses. Work orders on Maple Avenue are overdue. We will compensate for the delay and complete the work. The practice of selling tenant data has ended. The contract is terminated. Letters of termination are signed. Archives of data requests will be de-identified and removed from the operational layer. The Office of the Attorney General of Georgia has prepared a temporary restraining order on new evictions, and the fund is voluntarily agreeing to its terms without contest. He said he was not asking for forgiveness, but for verification, said he was staying and changing, said he understood. It was too late for some, and that hurt. But for those who could still be helped, he would start now. He nodded, stepped back, and at that moment the noise of the crowd returned like a living creature. Someone shouted, someone cried, someone held a phone silently, and he saw Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Tasha Nguyen raise her microphone, and then a short sound cut the air. There was nothing cinematic about it. There was hard reality. A man in the crowd, later the police would say he was a relative of a family recently evicted and now in a shelter, raised his hand, and everything happened quickly and with restraint, without details worth describing. Someone rushed, someone screamed, someone grabbed a sleeve, and very soon a yellow tape with the words "Police Line" stretched across the courthouse steps, separating the place where seconds before they had spoken of escrow and 10 million, and now fixed a tragedy. Within minutes, on the next block, the police detained the shooter. The summary was written plainly, without detail, noting he was a relative of a family evicted for stepped delinquencies, the very policy he had been canceling. The city fell silent for a moment, and that pause felt strangely close to the quiet he had asked for at the start. After the sudden quiet, the days unrolled like ledgers. The document packets he had managed to sign and file with the clerk became part of the record, which meant the moratorium took effect as an organizational obligation and not as a personal vow. The payment order to the city's legal aid fund went to the bank, and Legal Aid Atlanta posted the incoming reference. The repair escrow opened, and the first addresses, Jonesboro Road and Maple Avenue, appeared on the public page. The agreement to terminate the sale of tenant data to brokers was signed and sent, and vendors confirmed that access to the non-operational data layer was cut off. In the funds office sat people who yesterday defended the model and today printed notices to management companies with the phrases "moratorium in effect," "junk fee cancellation," and "link for repair requests." And it was work without heroics, but precisely the kind of work that turns a speech into action. The news wrote about the tragedy and about the fact that documents would live without the man. Social media argued whether 20% of the portfolio for cooperatives was enough, and someone posted a photo of a staircase with new railings and wrote, "I do not believe words, I believe railings," a simple metric. Hannah's kitchen became a place for checking items, not emotions. The kettle whistled on the gas stove, the wobbly folding IKEA chair squeaked at the slightest movement, white sandwich bread lay on the cutting board, tomato soup from Campbell's steamed in a bowl, and in the little crock-pot macaroni and cheese bubbled slowly. An Atlanta Braves magnet held a Publix receipt for yesterday's groceries, and above them, taped up, Maya's school photo. On the table lay a printout of his obligations with notes in the margins and links to the public repair pages. Next to it, Hannah's phone lay open to a letter from the Office of the Attorney General of Georgia, confirming a voluntary stipulation to the temporary restraining order on new evictions. He managed to say it aloud, and he managed to sign. "Now we watch what these papers do without him," Hannah said, flipping a mug so the handle would not loosen. "He said guilt, and I am staying," Maya said. "He just is not here anymore. We will watch the money and the railings." An adult sentence from a teenager who a week earlier had said, "I am ashamed." They ate in silence, and in that silence there was no reconciliation, just ordinary life, putting on the kettle, slicing white bread, checking a bank confirmation, and a list of addresses with closed work orders. The printouts on the table mattered more than any story. They had dates, amounts, mechanisms, signatures, and contacts for observers from the Tenant Union of Atlanta and Legal Aid Atlanta, which turned separate words into a system of control. He did not live to see them take down the placard with the filing algorithm's name in his office, nor to see the data engineer remove the late fee steps module from the production pipeline, but he did the main thing, admitted guilt and named action. He did not live to see a tenant's representative walk into the boardroom and put repair criteria and response times on the agenda. But the agenda landed on the table anyway because it had been written down and agreed. He did not read the message from the father of the boy on Jonesboro Road that said, "Thanks for the new railings," but the railings stood, and that was more precise than any applause. Hannah scribbled in the margin, "Check, 10 million, receipt and use, escrow, replenishment, sales, addresses, and appraisals." And Maya wrote beside it, "Smoke detectors, installation dates," because those were phrases you could verify with your eyes. None of it erased the past or returned what people had already lost. None of it canceled the pain and humiliation caused by algorithms. None of it turned brutal months into the right story. But it confirmed something simple. Wealth and algorithms do not cancel personal responsibility. Housing is basic safety and relationships, and admitted guilt has meaning only as action, with dates, sums, addressees, and public oversight, even if the chance to fix everything can break off suddenly. A week after the tragedy, a representative of the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development and a staffer from the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division came to the fund's office. The corridor still smelled of fresh paint because someone, nervous, had touched up the walls before the visit. Cardboard boxes of post-moratorium procedures sat on desks. The operations lead showed the repair escrow panel. Here are the addresses, here the balance, here are tenant requests. Observers from the Tenant Union of Atlanta and Legal Aid Atlanta have access. The balance is replenished monthly from a fixed share of income, An independent auditor is appointed, and the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development inspector nodded and asked, "And on Maple Avenue, have you completed accessibility work for people with disabilities?" The operations lead answered, "Yes, and here is the completion certificate." At that moment, the lawyer, the same one who had said, "Do not say guilt," looked at the $10 million order to the city's legal aid fund and said, "Payment went through. They are already publishing the cases they will cover." And it sounded like a quiet admission. Sometimes the right step must be taken, even if it is terrible for the stock price. In the office, they pinned up a paper sheet, questions for the board with the tenant's representative. And the first item was strangely short. Response time on work orders, 3 days. That evening, off camera, a group of tenants gathered in a common room at one complex. Plastic chairs, the smell of pizza, cheap lemonade in pitchers. On the whiteboard they had written in marker, moratorium, fee refunds, repair escrow, cooperative sales. A middle-aged woman raised a hand. "I do not want to pity anyone. I want my junk fee money back and my window fixed. I have a list." And the Tenant Union of Atlanta coordinator said, "Let us go point by point. There is a form, a hotline, observers." A young man in a ball cap asked, "Are cooperative sales a trap?" And a lawyer answered, "It depends on valuation and terms. Without a control premium and with an installment plan, it is a chance. We will watch." In a corner someone said, "He is gone," and a neighbor shrugged, "But the documents are here, and that matters." It was not cruelty, it was sobriety, action beyond the man. And none of it canceled the tragedy, but it turned words into a system. In Hannah's kitchen, life went on by bullet points. The kettle whistled, the chair squeaked, white bread was sliced, tomato soup from Campbell's was ladled into bowls, the little crock-pot burbled, the Atlanta Braves magnet held a Publix receipt, and on the fridge beside Maya's photo they pinned a printout of the board's meeting schedule, with items from the tenant's representative as the first line now. Hannah opened her laptop and checked. Repair escrow, replenishment, refund of junk fees, percentage completed, cooperative sales, addresses and appraisals. Maya sat with her algebra notebook and sometimes looked up to ask, "Is it true they installed the smoke detectors?" And Hannah answered, "Look, certificates and dates." They were not talking about something lofty, they were talking about the small things, when the letter would arrive, when the complaint button would work in the tenant portal, when the railing on the stairs would stop shaking. That was the right measure. Sometimes Maya messaged with classmates. Some wrote to her cruelly, others humanly. One girl sent a photo from the news and wrote, "I am sorry." And Maya replied without sentiment, "Thanks. Watch the actions, not the name." It was an adult sentence she learned not from slogans, but from lists, tables, and sign-offs. She was still angry, and that was honest. She was still ashamed of the past, and that was honest too. But she had a task she could do with her aunt, verify that promises turned into receipts and cash. Sometimes Hannah sat down in the evening and pulled out an old folder with the mortgage delinquency notice for their mother, and looked at the numbers that had turned a home into a commodity. She felt bitterness, and that bitterness softened at no 10 million, because the past does not change from big sums, but nearby lay a new printout, a list of addresses slated for cooperative sale, and their old house was there, and it was a complicated feeling. You will not get it back, and it may return to people. Hannah thought that memory does not evaporate because of new contracts, but new contracts do not have to copy old mistakes. She swiped her pen and wrote "Observe" next to 2 addresses, because that was something she could do. The city did not grow quieter. Some wrung their hands and said, "A repentant spectacle." Some said, "Too little and too late." Some said, "Better late than never." And some said, "For those right now, it is just in time." The Office of the Attorney General of Georgia continued its work. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau issued directives on removing junk fees. The United States Department of Housing and Urban Development made spot checks for accessibility. The United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division sent long letters requesting data sets. None of it depended on mood. It depended on deadlines and subsections listing dates, sums, addressees, and mechanisms of control. That was the point, turning one day's speech into a long chain of boring but precise actions. Sometimes Hannah muted the news and left only the quiet whistle of the kettle, the crinkle of the bag with white bread, the quick slosh of soup into a bowl, the burble of the crock-pot, and the click of the Atlanta Braves magnet on the fridge. Papers lay on the table, and above them she had written in pen, "This does not erase the past, but it makes the present governable." Maya read the letter Caleb had written her the day before, short and simple, no rhetoric. "I am guilty. I am staying. I will pay and change the processes. Do not demand that you believe me. Verify. I love you." She folded the letter and slid it between textbook pages, not as a relic, but as a reminder that love does not cancel responsibility, and responsibility sometimes becomes a form of love. And when one evening a Ford F-150 pulled up and a contractor stepped out with a box of smoke detectors, Hannah opened the door and said, "In here." And he said, "We have 3 for this address, plus battery replacements." And they worked in silence. Then the contractor handed her a completion form, a signature line at the bottom, and Hannah signed and added a small dot she used to mark "Done," and stuck a new note on the fridge: "Smoke detectors, installed." It was a small item in a large plan, and there was practical justice in that. Maya later photographed the form and sent it to a friend who had written, "It is all public relations," and texted back, "Public relations does not drive screws. People do." That was a simple truth. And so it went, dull, verifiable, with errors and fixes, with money arriving in accounts and going out to repairs, and with people who no longer received eighth-day letters. It did not make the world right. It only made it a little less unjust in places where a soulless module had once been running. And whenever people passed the steps of the Fulton County Courthouse, they could still see faint marks where the yellow police line tape had been tied to the iron rail, a reminder of the price on which dates and sums were written. It did not turn the end into a bright legend. It turned it into an honest thesis. This does not erase the past, does not return what people have already lost, and does not replace real pain with pretty intentions, but it insists on something simple. Wealth and algorithms do not cancel personal responsibility. Housing is basic safety and relationships, not a financial toy. And admitted guilt is worth anything only when it turns into actions with dates, sums, addressees, and mechanisms of control, even if the chance to fix everything can break off suddenly.